Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our seminar for the Institute for the ANU Institute for Climate, Energy and Disaster Solutions. We're very pleased today to have our visitors from the OECD, who are undertaking a new project on the green iron transition. We have with us today Stefan Reis, Giampiero Matera, and Anna Lockwood. They've travelled over the weekend from Paris, and their study is featuring a case study on the iron and steel outlooks for the green iron and steel outlook for Australia, and looking to bring in case studies for other countries too as the project progresses. I think without any further ado, I'll hand over to Stefan, who will explain the project that they're doing, undertaking. We're looking very much forward to collaborating with them and working on this interesting project. So over to you, Stefan. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John, and hi, everybody. Good to see you here, also online. I hope you can see me and hear me. I was told that I don't need any microphone. I used to play in a band, actually, with far fewer people in the room than now. So actually, I'm quite confident with how that works. But if you can't hear me, let me know, and I'll speak up a bit. We have a presentation, see if I can make this most for you, where I give a bit of a background of what we do at the OECD on steel, and also what we see happening in steel markets. And then John will dive into the project that we're doing on green iron, and then Anna will give us the first ideas that we got in speaking to quite a lot of people on this project, on how we see what's happening in Australia. And I mean, if you have any comments, questions, please just jump in. I mean, let's make it as conversational as possible. It's not always easy, but I think that usually works best. So that being said, I think you're all familiar with the OECD. You know, it's international organization in Paris. We got 4,000 people working for us. It's quite a lot. I didn't know that when I started working for that. But what I like about working at the OECD is that it's a combination of, let's say, not academic, but very research, data, analysis focus. It's a think tank, if you want to. And at the same time, it's also highly political and policy oriented. So I mean, when I did my PhD, I read somewhere that the average article was read by 3 people, and I decided I don't think I'm going to stay there. And I think the OECD balance a bit whenever doing that analysis, but also going for the relevance of what you do. Is our motto is better policies for better life, and we try to contribute to that. We work with many organizations around the world, including universities. Very glad to be here at ANU, and thanks to Frank and John and colleagues for having the opportunity to do so. We offer all kind of internship, but also, I mean, we got PhD students coming to stay with us for a bit. So if you're interested, just send us a line. We always like to, make sure that we connect to people outside of our little bubble and see how that works out. But on steel, the OECD works with committees where member states come together and discuss certain topics. And our main stakeholder is what you see here in the middle, is the OECD Steel Committee. That's a long-standing OECD committee, I think, since 1989. That's even older. I think 1979 it was. And the focus of that committee is traditionally on issues related to steel and level playing fields, capacity issues, trade issues. That's a bit our DNA, how we look at steel markets. But as you can imagine, over the last years, you cannot just have a capacity kind of perspective on steel if you want to understand what's going on. You need to also take the carbon aspects into account. You know that also much better than we do in terms of its carbon footprint, but also you increasingly need to take into account what's happening both in upstream markets, up into iron ore, and also downstream markets, up into, let's say, the embodiment of steel in different products that are traded around the globe. So you see this agenda of the Steel Committee, you see broadening a bit, and the project that John's going to describe is a good example of that. What we also facilitate or support is what's called the Global Forum on Steel Excess Capacity. That's a political kind of platform established in 2016 under the G20, with a focus exclusively on excess capacity. I'll show you a couple of the data in a second, with excess capacity rising again, leading to havoc on global steel markets. That's the DNA of this GEFSEC, as we call it. Australia is going to be the chair of the GEFSEC in 2025. That was just decided 2 weeks ago, and we're very glad to work with colleagues. So we make use of our visit here, not only to talk about green iron like we did this morning with the federal government, but also to talk about this global forum of steel excess capacity, where DFAT will be in the chair over the next year. Last but not least, and Australia is also part of that, we also in my team support the Climate Club, which is a industrial decarbonization initiative launched under the G7 in 2022 in December, which aims to accelerate decarbonization processes, including in steel, where we do a lot of work that's relevant as well. Anna works in the secretariat for that. We do that work together with the International Energy Agency. So this is a bit our business card of what we do, who we are. Of course, if you have any comments or questions, let me know. But let me now move to substance. I mean, when we look at global steel markets, we see two developments happening at the same time, interrelated, leading to wider complexities than the steel market already is, which as I think you know, has been complex for quite some time. What we see happening at the moment, and it's not the first time, it happened in 2015 and 16 as well, is that there's a rise in overcapacity in the sector. We define overcapacity as the difference between demand and capacity, not cyclical developments, but more the structural ones. And you see how that gap between demand and capacity is widening significantly. Just to illustrate you how big that is, this is on the left-hand side, I think, for you as well. You see the expected excess capacity that we see in the coming years. That is more than the total steel production of all OECD countries together. That is considerably more than the total value of steel trades. This is not a big thing. There's this glut in the market of capacity that's standing there that dwarfs, if you want to, production and trade in a number of countries. The source of that expansion in capacity has largely been in Asia as well as in the Middle East. I mean, China is, as you know, by far the largest steel producer and buyer of iron ore from Australia, for that matter. But you see that also countries like Iran, Indonesia, India, Vietnam are raising their steel production quite rapidly and become part of that growth in capacity. What we see happening as well, that's interesting too, is that the growth of capacity in steel around the world is not just what happens in one country. It's more and more interconnected. The growth that we see in ASEAN countries in particular in steel production is to a significant extent related to foreign direct investment by China in these countries, often in very high emissions facilities. I'll get back to that in a minute. So you see this drive, this exporting of Chinese capacity to other countries, often lock, stock, and barrel, where these factories are being rebuilt and has the capacity growth in combination. And I'm not sure if I got a slide on that in here. No, I don't. But with a strong rise in exports from China as a reflection of this drop in demand and ongoing capacity, exports from China more than doubling since 2021, imports going down by more than the same number. So you see how excess capacity is not just something that happens in the market, it's not a static fact, but through FDI as well as trade is also going towards other economies. Now next, to this excess capacity rise, to the crisis, the way that we see it in the OECD, we also, of course, all know that the steel industry needs to decarbonize, as I said in the beginning, with a significant share in global emissions, even larger, of course, in industrial emissions, and that this requires a transformation that goes very deeply into both companies as well as policy settings that are required from countries. This shows you a bit the link, or the direct link, if you want to, between capacity developments and emissions. This graph shows in blue the higher emissions kind of production routes that are currently being built in terms of capacity, and in orange, the secondary steel route that is significantly less emission intensive. And what you see is that the growth in capacity that's currently taking place is primarily in these high emission routes. So there's a direct link between the growth in capacity as well with the growth in emissions. Complexity goes even beyond that. What our work also shows is that the link between capacity and decarbonization not just goes via this graph, but also these capacity developments have an impact on the productivity as well as the profitability in the steel industry, and therefore also on the capacity of steel firms to invest in that decarbonization. So both directly as indirectly, there's a link between capacity development and decarbonization. Here, this graph shows the impact on profitability. It shows the capacity in blue and the operating profits of companies in the black line, without suggesting total causality, but you see that it goes in opposite directions. These things are related, as I said, decarbonization and capacity development. Also, if you look more precisely, and also when you look at what John is going to take it over and in the next slide, in different aspects of the market, excess capacity and decarbonization increase the demand for raw materials for iron making, leading to higher prices and more competition in upstream markets, and the need to better understand and forecast these at granular level. Countries and companies move upstream and try to save access to raw materials, and also move downstream to increase value added from raw materials, in particular green iron ore, and that's the project that we're going to talk about, risking to lead to undesirable policy competition, market fragmentation, and the fundamental changing in global supply chains. John, I'll hand over to you, and I think your first slide is just a summary of what I did.
Cheers. Thank you, Stefano, for the great introduction. The project we started a few months ago, is about, we call it the Green Iron Revolution. There's a specific, I don't know if the Green Iron Revolution, and why a revolution is because we think that the green iron, the transition towards green iron will fundamentally change the whole steel value chain. It's going to create a lot of complexity and policy challenges that will be very important to discuss and study in order to make sure that countries and governments will are well equipped to support this transition. That's why we think that having a project on green iron would be very important. So why a focus on green iron production and trade is important. So first, kind of background, Stefano already mentioned that steel industry across the world face the need to decarbonize their industry, but at the same time, all the steel industry across the world differ quite significantly in terms of industry structure, access to resources, policy settings. So this heterogeneity in industry structure really leads to many complex policy challenges, because the path towards decarbonization may come very different, may be very different. And of course, we need to factor in this element when designing the right policy framework for decarbonization. Having said that, the greening of iron production is of pivotal importance, and there's always a discussion. As Stefan was mentioning, the whole steel kind of value chain accounts for more than 8% of total carbon emission. But the greening iron production takes a large share of this 8%. So the greening of iron production is certainly a fundamental element for the decarbonization efforts globally. Iron and steel production becoming increasingly separated geographically, and I will get back to this point. But this is exactly what will happen when the transition to green iron will what the transition to green iron will lead to. The fact that iron production could take place in places different from where steel is actually produced, leading to complex scenarios in terms of trade and production. Green iron production taking place at those locations offering the most favorable circumstances, in particular when it comes to renewable energy, access to inputs, and other important elements. So just to give you some background, so what is green iron? Let's review the two main iron making processes. So first, let's start with the traditional integrated steel making. How steel it is produced. So from the input perspective, from the iron ores, we know that Australia is an important producer of iron or iron ores. And the traditional models that iron ores is basically shipped towards other economies, and where basically the traditional iron making through blast furnace occurs through the iron ore and the use of coke, which is then produces as an output to the molten iron, which is then used for producing steel. So this is the integrated steel making process is exactly the combination of the iron making and the molten and the steel production together in the same place. The direct reduction is basically the production process that for which I'll get back to this point later. But anyway, the direct production is different in the sense that the iron ores goes to the direct reduction process that uses either natural gas or hydrogen produced through renewable energy to reduce the iron in products that could be then shipped towards other locations. So this is exactly the point I would like to make in this line: the fact that the DRI, which is the output of this process, is a product that could be shipped, could be traded, and this leads to a completely different kind of market scenarios in which the market element, the direct reduction, could be placed in location where either natural gas or other forms of energy exist. So where there are particularly favorable conditions that will lead to this production. Whereas then the steel production could be made somewhere else. So the implications of DRI, which is quite a well-known production process, that DRI, the direct reduction, is less carbon intensive than traditional mediums, and that's already very important. But the direct reduction can be directly separated from further steel making processes. And direct reduction also obtained from renewable energy resources significantly abates carbon emission, which is essentially the green iron element we would like to discuss today. So having said that, yes, please.
Great section here.
That's a very good point. Could be either DRI or HBI. But DRI,
Or is it what wrong?
it's a kind of it's a kind of spheres. It's usually. Sorry?
Pellets, not you wanted to scroll out.
Pellets, yeah, pellets. It's one of the forms. Depends on whether it's DRI. HBI is a further processing of the DRI elements. It's it's hot briquettes iron basically, and it's in the forms of pellets of. Or sorry, other question.
What sound back? What sort of carryings then ours? Is it use a bulk carrier or would you carry also?
It could be bulk carriers, but there needs to be it's completely different product with respect to raw iron, and in sense that DRI is a more kind of it's more reactive. It's a kind of it's a difficult element, so it needs to be it needs to have a specific shipping methods, specific then like I said, specific bulk carriers for shipping. So it's a different transport mode. I think I'll touch upon this point later, but
There are lots of rules about the density and
Yeah.
it's in danger fetching fire because
yeah,
awesome.
yeah, it's a very active material. So it's completely different type of. Sorry, you have a question, I think.
Shit, but I'm interested in a final process of using natural gas energy or through other renewables. I know hydrogen context is the distinction between blue hydrogen and red hydrogen. Is there any sort of distinction then between iron and blue red? Is there such things as real life and very
You mean the in terms of product, final product, or the process itself?
just in terms of, I guess, more the emissions and so like I'm believing that using renewables that final is going to be as the direct reduction would be as emissions intensive as what using natural gas would be. So I suppose is there any sort of structures that have been in place to distinguish between the emissions that would come in the process from using natural gas?
Well, it's clear that natural gas is more, it's more carbon intensive than the process through the direct reduction through renewables. I don't know exactly the scale, but very much depends on the process used. There's a variety of processes used for producing this type of reduction, but don't exactly. Whether your question was more on the emission side or whether, but then the product is exactly the same. Yeah, please.
So this is a flag question. It's something related to the Rob's in source mission has got a framework out for instance for how you think about this. And it's all about being able to actually help machines new flex and then less about labeling it blue or green, like trying to step away from that and just understanding machines intensity and then you that business decide.
Yes, and colleagues, if I can suggest, we've got quite a sizable online audience, so we could maybe let presentations run, having a structured Q&A that they will be a quick help.
No, but that's a very interesting point from the labeling perspective. I must say that we haven't touched upon this point but certainly what we know is that there's no clarity on how actually define green iron, in the sense that our perspective was more like on the from the perspective of the input used, so the fact of using or not renewable energy. But I know that a lot of the old concept, the green iron, how to exactly define the green iron is, of course, is something that is discussed at the international level. But certainly our perspective in this presentation and the project in general is more like from the renewable energy perspective. So how to make sure the direct reduction, the type of products, iron product would be produced by renewable energy. And of course, all the market and policy implications of those processes. So just looking at focus on so we know the Australia and Brazil are by far the largest producers and exporters of iron ore. But if we go a bit moving along the iron ore value chains, other actors, including MENA countries, are playing a role in DRI production space. So that's a very interesting question, because even without looking at the green iron component of DRI or HBI production or exports, we already see that from iron ores to iron ore market to the DRI, which is a bit kind of more downstream, we see that a completely different geographical scenario. So the current largest DRI producers are not either Brazil or Australia, but actually many economies in the MENA region, plus India, Russia, and the North America. So it's a completely different scenario. And why this is the case? Because the availability of energy, particularly cheaper energy, particularly in the Middle East countries, is playing a role for the production of DRI. And this, of course, may have a lot of implication when it comes to really if the steel industry will really move towards green iron production, which because this is kind of separation is already taking place. All the DRI produced in the MENA region, and particularly in India, are actually gas-based, so it's not green iron. But certainly, this country already have the plants already operating, and this again, of course, leads a lot of discussion at the national level when it comes to what are the policy implications of these movements. Having said that, risks opportunity for green iron. So we already touch upon this point. So the fact that transition to green iron may lead to a fundamental transformation of the entire global supply chain. And to complex policy dilemmas, they require global cooperation and dialogue. And that's where we think that the OECD can play a role. Risk and opportunities certainly a significant opportunity for iron producing economies like Australia in moving to add a value to their iron production and make sure that its industry can develop and perhaps also get additional margin on their exports. Also support global decarbonization efforts because the transition to green iron could definitely lead to really support the whole decarbonization efforts of the steel industry globally, but also impacts on the existing steel operations, governments, and society. This is another point, as Stefan rightly discussed, of the capacity dynamics that we are observing. And the world, but like the transition to green iron could definitely lead to, for instance, to completely a reshuffling of the traditional steelmaker company into a complete separation of green iron production in locations where there's higher access to renewable energy and high grade ores, whereas steel operation only in countries where already existing steel operation are in place. So, and this may have an impact on why I say government and societies, because this may lead to fundamental implications for labor, for instance, and shut down on more say all the plants, all the steel plants, and this, of course, all these dynamics need to be considered at the policy levels and needs to be considered. Creation of newer business model. What we are observing now, and we'll touch upon this point later, is that steel companies and iron ore producers are really moving for, from the company's perspective, many actions, many strategies are taking place now, and we're already observing that to support this transition. Meaning, many large steel corporations are investing upward in the renewable energy space to make sure they have higher access to energy inputs for their green iron production, but also, for instance, iron ore producers which invest. For instance, we saw, for instance, Vale, which is a leader in the production of high grade pellets, exporting signing agreements with governments in Middle East countries for exporting high-grade pellets towards this economy for further processing in these economies, for then export these products again towards European markets. So all this newer, say, business models needs to be considered when it comes also for policy making, because governments need to know what this transition could mean from for their economies, for their companies. So another point which is very important, we think, is the unnecessary company policy competition that can further delay decarbonization efforts. What we're observing now is that there are many agreements between countries or within kind of bilateral agreements that are somehow exploring ways to support green iron transition. And this is a very important, and this is, but it will also lead to kind of avoidable policy competition where countries and companies compete to get to ensure reliable supplies of green iron in the future. Of course, this condition need to be considered when it comes. It's perhaps not the most efficient way to needs to be considered whether this is actually the best, the most efficient way to proceed. So a kind of a more a call for, let's say, high-level policy discussions needs to be considered for making sure that this transition will not lead to winners and losers. Having said that, this is the kind of the background for our project, and of course there's a need for strong evidence base, which is kind of lacking at the international level. So in terms of data analysis on what kind of implication this transition could lead to. So in terms of iron ore availability, in terms of renewable energy capacity, in terms of infrastructure across different regions, but also a global cooperation and proper policy dialogue is needed, and this is part also of our project. So in terms of, I touched upon the point from the government perspective, how are governments and companies positioning themselves in this scenario? This is part of our mapping exercise. Our project will look at both the government policy response and the company strategy, the company strategies. So the question, for instance, that the government, and these are the fundamental questions that the governments would be facing, is, for instance, what kind of investments are needed to support green iron, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of renewable energy, and how these things actually talk each other, and whether like a supportive policy for renewable energy and all the infrastructure, for instance, to then sell the product. Like, for instance, the port infrastructure is very important. We discussed the role of the fact that DRI and HBI are completely different products, and needs to be, and ports need to have like a specific storage for making sure that the DRI can be efficiently shipped. And this is clearly important questions for government. But also, which segment of the steel and iron value chain needs to be supported? How can international agreements with other countries help in this context? For instance, Germany is actively looking for partners for ensuring a reliable supply of green iron in the future. These agreements need to be somehow considered in international context. What are the economic and societal impacts of this transition? I was talking about labor, and this is another important element, because all this discussion, we saw earlier that location is important in this context. So location elements, the separation between iron production and steel production will lead to possible mass layoffs in places where still traditional steel operations are placed, and this of course may have important also consideration for policy. From the company's perspective, we are distinguishing between iron ore producers, steel companies, and technological companies, and that's also another interesting angle. For instance, for iron ore producers, the big question is whether to move to green iron production, or we have, for instance, in Australia, many important iron ore producers, and the big question is whether they are actually actively considering to move towards green iron production, or whether to just establish and strengthen the relationship with steel companies. From the steel company perspective, is investment upwards the value chain to safeguard access to critical resources and technologies. It's another important element. we are observing that these technological companies are playing a pivotal role in this context. For instance, in companies that know that are have the technology for renewable energy, for green energy production, and this is, for instance, there are many companies that are perhaps smaller than typical steel company, but may have the knowledge for supporting this transition quite smoothly in the future. But their issue is how to ensure scalability of their R&D investments to be able to compete in the market. So this is the government and companies perspective we are looking at in this, and the objective of our project is to certainly to strengthen the evidence base, our current developments in the green iron and iron ore markets. We already drafted a preliminary report which looks at this developments, but the idea is to do more in the following months, and the idea is to lead to a full report by the end of next year. But there's also an interest in looking at specific key countries and players across the iron ore steel value chain in key countries to understand their roles and strategy in their transition to green iron. And we already a project on Australia is underway, and we already had official confirmation for an additional case study on Canada. So this we are really looking at the peculiarities of these markets, and the idea is to with these case studies, and the idea is to look at the specific context and compare the Australians and the Canadian case respect to what we are observing in other geographies. But also to provide a platform for strategic dialogue, so fostering collaboration and addressing challenges within the green iron landscape. This means, from the policy perspective, means organizing high-level dialogues with governments and industry stakeholders in order to and foster discussions on high-level discussion on policy, how to make sure that a policymaker can support this transition in an efficient way. So the underlying economic model that we are considering in this project is that the developments in green iron production and trade are a result of the strategies and action undertaken by companies, and I was talking about how companies are behaving in this space. So this company actions do not take place in a vacuum, in isolation, but are driven by four main elements. So these are the four drivers of green iron production: the availability, access to high-grade iron, but also the renewable energy component. Another important element is the market factor. So we're considering like a country like Australia, if Australia will move towards green iron production, to which markets are available to sell these products. For instance, Korea and Japan, but also China. So all this element, and what kind of developments are important for supporting this transition, and why? The government policy perspective is also very important. For instance, we would like to know map what governments are doing in terms of, for instance, support to iron subsidies to the not only subsidies to the iron or steel sector, but also the policy framework they are shaping in order to support this transition. So all the, for instance, the strategies or the trade agreements they are establishing with other nations in order to support green iron production. So this is the model we have in mind. Of course, happy to take your questions, but and I will give the floor to Anna, who may say a few words on the first preliminary findings on upstream. Thanks.
Thanks, John. So I think I'll try and keep it a little bit short. I'll try and keep it to 5 minutes and just kind of give an overview of our initial assessment. So as Stefan mentioned, we've spoken to quite a lot of stakeholders in Australia now and learned what's going on in the policy landscape a little bit. So this was just to give an overview of what we've learned so far. So as John's explained, obviously Australia, has this huge opportunity with the iron ore availability that we have here. We also have huge potential for renewables, and this raw material availability is, what's positioning Australia somewhere with great potential to be a hub for green iron production. But when it comes to that iron ore, we do have a lower grade than some of the competitors in the global landscape. So I think 40% of our iron ore that's mined is magnetite, but that's mostly used domestically, and 95% of our exports are hematite. So that is going to be a challenge, both technologically and thinking about the different locations there. So the investments that are needed to make those iron ore grades workable for the DRI route still need to be explored. And when we're looking at the renewable energy, we talk about potential a lot. Australia has that 82% target by 2050, 2030. Yes, that's better, isn't it? So that's going to be a real challenge, and that's not necessarily taking into account what we can trade. So there's a really big challenge there in terms of the renewables investments. So that's one of the other things that will remain to be seen, is how fast can those renewables be upscaled. But because of the land mass in Australia, there is that potential there. Also, when we're talking about infrastructure, as John mentioned, we're not necessarily seeing a perfect overlap in where the iron ore resources are available and where that green iron could be produced. So that geography is a particular situation in Australia that would be different in competing countries around the world. And this creates a specific infrastructure challenge. So both in terms of transporting the product, but also in terms of pipelines and grids, we're talking about great Australian distances. In terms of demand, so as John mentioned as well, we have all good reason to think that there could be a great market for this. So particularly in Korea and Japan, it looks like there is the potential for great cost competitiveness. But how those trade partnerships materialize is still, a work in progress that, the government is active in, and there are trade partnerships that are starting to materialize in that area. And in terms of the policy environment, there is supportive industrial policies in Australia, specifically for green iron as well, which is quite unique. There's real policy enthusiasm here. We also see less emphasis on R&D funding in Australia compared to other OECD countries. And I was at the National Innovation Forum this morning where they were, talking about this a lot. The percentage of Australian GDP that's going into R&D is lower. So there are ambitious policies to increase that, and we're seeing really quite exciting policy moves in this area. So in terms of hydrogen, we've seen, great announcements recently with the Hydrogen Head Start program and the production tax incentive. So there seems to be a real policy movement in that area, but there is competition from overseas with potentially deeper pockets. So it remains to be seen exactly how competitive those incentives can be. And another key policy consideration in Australia is just transition. So when we're talking about this industry that would be largely started from scratch in Australia, you don't have the same labor transition issues that you might have in other countries, but you do have other issues. So you know, to move people and skills in the right places with the right skills. That's a really big challenge. In the Pilbara, for example, we're talking about really thousands of people that would be required, and the FIFO system is a very expensive one. So all of that is coming into the costings of things. We also, when it comes to just transition, it's worth mentioning that the opportunities for rural communities and Indigenous communities in Australia is really, really big. But if that is to play out in a way that benefits those communities, it would need to, there needs to be a really strong strategy there to make sure that that's how it happens. So thank you very much. I'll leave it there.
Thank you much. Enough. Thanks to all our speakers. We now have a little time for some discussion. I guess we have to. We're tethered to our microphone here. We're not, Jerry. So our speakers could come. We'll form a little huddle or something. I have some questions to raise. I did want to just say a couple of words before launching the Q&A, if I may. I did sort of hurtle into it. There's a little bit of context here. ANU's been active in this field of green iron steel since 2018 or so. We had a pioneering program called Zero Carbon Energy for the Asia Pacific, which is now embedded in the Institute for Climate, Energy and Disaster Solutions that the ANU runs. And so we've been sort of playing with these questions of what Australia's role can be in the green iron steel transition. And we've been tackling this problem from policy perspectives, economic perspectives, and technical technology perspectives. So it's something we're very interested in, and it's great to see that there's a growing mandate to address this topic. So there's a little bit of why I'm here and why we're all talking about this at ANU, I guess, today. And Frank Yotso has been a key person in connecting us all together. He's actually as a report for your project, as well as is Chris Bataille, who was here speaking very recently, the last ISET seminar, in fact. All of very great interest to us, thanks to the ANU colleague and government representatives. So any questions for the speakers? Yes.
I'm not too sure whether you guys have the technical background, but in another life, I can remember the Australian government was trying to increase downstream processing of mineral resources, and the iron ore exporters had an agreement with the West Australian government to increase processing. And I can remember talking to a CRA, a research scientist, saying that the project they were funding, he said that the devil is when you try to upscale. So everything's working fine in a pilot project, and then you increase the scale, and then unexpected problems come in. And I think this is what I'm worried about, quite apart from the cost of hydrogen. How far are we along the research, pilot, etc., commercialization path to know whether this will actually work? Because in Australia's experience, and you OECD people may not be aware, the BHP's hot briquetted iron factory, so to speak, blew up. That was a good excuse to have to bail out. And I think the CRA project, which was thought ice bed technology,
Hicewell.
Hicewell, I think you.
I think that might be talking about Hicewell there. Yeah.
I don't think that actually got as far as the BHP project. I suppose what I'm getting at is this possible? It's a bit like the argument that nuclear in Australia will take us 20 years, and I have a feeling that this green steel will be a similar timescale, maybe worse.
A lot of debates about timescales. I'd be keen to hear what Steve Leader.
I mean, I'm not sure that I've got technical capabilities to fully understand the question, to fully answer the question. But I mean, the thing that we've been seeing and also discussing over the last months is that there's a strong proposition in Australia in terms of resources that you have available. But is that in itself enough to go from A to B? I mean, and there is part of that is a technological question. To what extent, indeed, the kind of products and processes that you need to do that are currently mature enough to go there. I mean, there, I must say, in literature, I don't think that I see most of the obstacles being raised. The Bateman Johnson are different. I mean, But there's other aspects. I mean, for instance, in terms of markets, I mean, maybe you have a good cost competitiveness of producing downstream kind of products, but you need people to buy it. I mean, there's perhaps something to look further into. Is not only to have a supply side kind of perspective in your policy setting, but also put sufficient emphasis on making sure that you can sell it elsewhere. So these, I mean, next to, of course, you have policy frameworks you need to implement there. I think that part of the opportunity, but also the challenge that the city stands for, is to make sure that step by step you overcome them and really make sure that they lead to tangible kind of results. Well, I mean, there's lots of optimism here, isn't that? I mean, that's you can't put a radio on of somebody saying something positive about this move to green iron.
I feel the technical challenges are there, but we have at least as big challenges generating markets and getting horse in place. And I think that's what's able this project to take place. But I don't think there are all the technical barriers. I think anything, the bigger barriers in other aspects. That would be my thing. That is either of you answer that question.
Yeah, if I could just add, I mean, there are these big technical challenges. Sorry, if there are these big technical challenges, which definitely exist, they exist to some extent, maybe everywhere. So if, you know, there are these skills challenges about getting the right skills into the right places, you can basically say that our competitors are facing those same challenges to some extent. So, you know, it's, you know, there are different countries facing different challenges, and if Australia can get them within an appropriate window, then they get there in the appropriate window.
Yeah, but and to complement to that, there's one of the elements is how much time it will be required to do that, to get to the market. And the one of the issues I think Australia also needs to face is the competition from other countries. I think as Anna was mentioning, the fact that if the Australia can maybe the Australia can stimulate other countries from other regions, like particularly from the MENA regions, who may have access to specific inputs, also start support from the governments may count first. So there's also the lower elements to consider when it comes to the scalability of this project, but also the international dimension, the competition with other countries needs to be considered.
We have a few questions that have come from online, so if you'll indulge me, I'll take at least one from online, and then we might go back to the room. There's a question from Henry Adams here saying, I understand you've narrowed your focus to DRI. Did you look at other emerging green steel production methods, particularly molten oxide electrolysis? I actually had a very similar question myself, seeing some of your own answer. Is that like coming online?
We're exploring many different paths actually, and these are of course all under our radar. In the company, from the perspective of the company, so what we are doing now is to map all the projects the companies are undertaking in this space in a very granular way. So looking at all the different elements, types of project, types of outputs, but also types of inputs are needed for the projects, and the type of partnership needed for undertaking this project, and so all these elements will be considered in the project.
Yes. There was a question at the back here. I'll repeat it for the online.
Thanks. I was wondering whether carbon markets and carbon capture and storage technologies are part of the discussion, and what considering them. I think they are incentives, disincentives, in the sense that more investment carbon capture and storage is needed. So should companies that are in this process of transitioning invest in that, or directly invest in fuels?
So to repeat the question for online, essentially how important are carbon markets in this piece, and carbon capture and storage, and companies thinking in this space need to be thinking about all those possibilities.
Very nice question to ask for a group with a jet lag, of course. Thanks for that. I mean, that the question, I suppose, I mean, is carbon markets, I mean, is pricing in the first place. I mean, that, and how pricing affects developments in market supply in our, what we learned again this morning is that the Australian government puts a lot of emphasis on the fact that carbon pricing market mechanisms are developed elsewhere, and that will put pressure on companies in these countries to make sure that they decarbonize as quickly and against and at as low cost as possible, which will provide incentives or possibility for green iron producer Australia to deliver that. I mean, that makes sense. At the same time, as I think you know as well, in the existing CBAM in Europe, there are big discussions on how green iron should be treated or not. So whereas these incentives in Asian countries indeed might be aligned with what the Australian government has in mind, I mean, how exactly the dealing with green iron is going to take place in the existing CBAM is still open for discussion. Carbon capture storage utilization, I mean, I think that various studies, including the IEA, show that this is a necessary intermediate kind of technology that you need to reach the 250 goals. But as you say, I mean, it's not the solution. I mean, it's not whatever taking it away by the source, which you would do in terms of renewable hydrogen-based green iron production. So there is indeed, I suppose, that the possible trade-off. You need it for your first steps. But I mean, does it make the next steps harder? There's plenty of people who would argue that the last inputs. Yeah.
We've just got a few minutes left, so I want to see if we can get through a few rapid fire answers. So let's try to ask brief questions and get brief replies in the middle.
Thanks very much for your presentation. What you spoke about, having been here at Sources in the web market. I suppose in the short term, my question to you is, assuming that I'm assuming that overcapacity is putting pressure on revenue producers, which means that would serve as a barrier for them really falling on faster with green energy transition. I suppose checking out something with you, but secondly, long term, do you see that trade bifurcation maybe fall down the track because essentially you might merge where still making then green iron producing some potentially price distortions as well in green iron technology.
So trade bifurcation and also how overcapacity affects the participants in this market, their ability to act in the strategy.
Look, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the point that I try to make is that indeed excess capacity via its impact on profitability and prices whatever reduces possibilities to invest in low carbon technologies. I mean that we're further looking at that to show that empirically, but that's something I think that would be widely accepted. In terms of developments in markets, I would think that you're right. I mean, the CBAM has incentivized, I think, greener production elsewhere. But you might very well, of course, meet to a situation that, say, in China, there's strong emphasis on greening part of its steel production. That part is being used for export, whereas the primary, whatever rest of it, will be used for the domestic market. Is not taking that stance. I mean, so it might take place within countries, but also, of course, across countries when some countries don't have the possibility to move forward in decarbonizing. That's the Climate Club that we're working on, I think, is a very important initiative in that respect to make sure that you don't only have the front runners move forward, but also other countries who are not so easily able to do that.
I'm going to indulge myself for a final question because the other two who I saw have their hands up will be joining us for a later discussion. Coming out of COP, where my colleague Fiona has been, and I don't know how you got here in time for this, but you did. There was a lot of discussion about transferring resources to support developing countries. It seems to me that establishing green steel industries could be a very significant part of this transfer. Do you have any comments on that? Is that something you're thinking about, or are there already some clear pictures in that?
Okay, that's a very important question. And to be honest, this is a part of the project. So looking at also developing countries out there moving in that space. Certainly, it's under our reader. What we are observing now is that, in particular, when it comes to the major developments, the bigger companies are definitely like leading this transition, which might have the implication also when it comes to the development of this particular specific markets in developing areas. So this is something that needs to be discussed, I think, at a high level internationally, because of course, maybe it could be an opportunity also for developing economies, but certainly for the moment we are not observing that.
I'll just add really quickly, and that's why we're also interested in this sort of strategic dialogue element of the project, as from an even playing field perspective, and to ensure that we have an even playing field, so that developed countries also have an opportunity to use their resources in that way.
Yeah, I picked up that message from the materials I read. I thought it was very good you're bringing to the topic. We're out of time, everyone. So please let's thank our visitors from the OECD. Stefan, Santiago, and Anna. Thanks very much.